Well, this is President's Month, and President's Month we honor, of course, our first president, Washington, and also the Civil War president who went through some tough times. And we're so fortunate to have a descendant of Lincoln on the show today. Her name is Catherine Ritchey, and she's a descendant of
Nancy Hanks, who was Lincoln's mother.
Yeah. How'd you find out?
It's the family's been awfully proud of it for a very, very long time.
So you didn't have to discover it?
No, and as the more genealogy we've done, the more important we understand why Lincoln was the man that he was and why he was so beloved. And of course, Valentine's Day is on Friday, so let's talk about being beloved in a little bit different terms.
Absolutely,
Okay.
because there's so many kinds of love. I know that you've kind of put together a presentation, so I'll let you kind of take the lead on that,
Okay.
because we know that you are a relative of Lincoln, and here you go.
Okay. What I wanted to talk to you about today, Ann, is a little bit about how Lincoln became the man that he became. And I guess you have to understand that your genealogy is very important, whether in any family. Let's look at two brothers who came over in 1692 from Birmingham, England. Their names were Uriah and Amos Hanks. They landed at the Plymouth colony in, obviously, Plymouth, Massachusetts, in 1692, stayed there briefly. One went to Jamestown colony in Virginia, and the other one went west. Going west in those days was
tough.
Quite something. So the two brothers separated, and the one going west, Amos, ended up in Salt Lake City. And from him comes some pretty famous people. This happens to be Sam Hanks, who was a race car driver in the California area. This one everyone knows. Tom Hanks is a direct descendant. And we did have a family reunion in the 1990s in Plymouth, Massachusetts, that over 700 attended of the Hanks family, and he attended and very graciously addressed the group. He was particularly interested in doing the movie Saving Private Ryan because it was so similar, and the story was based upon a letter that Lincoln wrote to Mrs. Bixby in Massachusetts, who lost 5 of her sons in the Civil War. And it's considered to be one of his most famous things that he ever wrote. We have some other relatives you probably don't know about. George Clooney is a descendant. Everybody knows
That would make
him.
Rosemary Clooney descendant too, right?
That's correct. This is Meryl Streep. She is also related. This all came as a great surprise to me. We have another one on the next slide. Brad Pitt.
Oh, stop. Really?
I know. Nobody else in our family is that handsome. And believe it or not, Mitt Romney, and he came from the eastern side of the family that stayed in the
that
eastern
stayed in
seaboard.
Jamestown. Okay. But he ended up in Salt Lake City, didn't he? Or?
There's so many ties to the Hankses and the Lincolns to this particular area. This is an unknown hero maybe to many. His name is Colonel Benjamin Hanks. He he was a silversmith, a watchmaker, a bell maker, and he was located in Waterville.
So there's a connection with the Hanks family locally.
He was part of the Lexington raid. His biggest thing was making surveying instrument and particularly bells. This happens to be the Portland Headlight in Portland, Maine, and that bell is still there. Not ringing anymore, but it has an honorable place. We have another one which is the Freedom Bell in Stone Mountain, Georgia. That was made in Waterville.
I had no idea they made bells in Waterville.
Absolutely.
Oh
There's several more that we're going here. He also made clocks. There's a tall clock there on the left, and on the right is I'm reaching. He also made bells. Carillons.
Carol, yeah, I know. What
It's part of age, yeah. This,
no, it's just that it's an unusual instrument.
A local connection on his bell is in September of 1913, there was a bad fire at the Ballston Church in
Oh,
the
yeah.
Boston Spa, and the tower was destroyed. Fortunately, the bell was saved and afterward reinstalled in it. So that's a little bit of a local story. That's a copy of the ad for the Bell Foundry that goes back to the late 1700s, early 1800s. That's just a look at that Meneely Foundry in Waterville. The Meneely name came when Julius Hanks's daughter married Andrew Meneely, and so then they merged and the son became involved, or son-in-law. There's a carillon there at Albany City Hall, which is a National Historic Place. That is a Hanks carillon. The New York City Hall has his clocks.
Wow, and this is all connected
All
to
connected
Lincoln.
to,
Oh my God.
right.
Yeah.
Colonel Benjamin Hanks founded the Waterville Arsenal, which manufactured the first brass cannons ever used in America. And they were used...
Were they used in the Civil War?
They were, and
Oh my
that's
gosh.
Gettysburg, and many of his cannons were used there. He was buried in front of the original Waterville Arsenal, but during the 60s and 70s, protesters shot at the gravestone, and it was decided it would be safer and more respectful to move his grave, so they moved it to the Albany Rural Cemetery. This brings us to the next person in the Hanks family that was a significant personage, and that was Nancy Hanks, who was born in Virginia. She later married Thomas Lincoln and moved to Kentucky, and she and Thomas Lincoln became the parents of Abraham Lincoln. He has said many times during his life that he owed everything that he was that was good and right to his mother. He had a great deal of respect for her. Nancy unfortunately died at 35 years old. Interestingly enough, in Kentucky, there was a brook running through the fields, and the cows would graze along the brook, and people in that particular area around the brook started dying of a wasting type disease, and it was later determined that she died from what they called milk sickness. The cattle were eating the weeds along the edge of the creek, which were toxic.
Where she was buried?
And it was going to the milk, and that was how the poisoning came.
Oh my God.
So it was a very interesting story.
How many children did she have? How many siblings did Lincoln have?
He had one sister.
Okay.
This is him when he's beginning his political career in Illinois. He looks pretty young, pretty vigorous. He doesn't have nearly as many wrinkles. He's missing his beard and his top hat. I didn't bring one today, a beard or a top hat.
Oh, okay. Well, that's all right.
This is his memorial in Illinois, Springfield, Illinois. There's a museum there as well.
Now, they went from Kentucky to Illinois.
To Illinois, and that's where he began his political career.
Right.
During that period of time in Illinois, he met up with Mary Todd, who was from a Confederate Southern family. Very interesting. It was a very tumultuous relationship.
Oh my gosh, when you consider the Civil War.
When you consider the political aspects of it. And that was when she was married on the left, and then on the right is Mary Todd Lincoln close to the time of her death. That's Lincoln. It's hard to see him because obviously early photographs were very blurry, but he's sitting on the porch with his two sons. They had a total of 4 children. The first son died before they left Illinois to go to Washington. 2 of the boys came to the White House with him, Willie and Tad, and the last child and the oldest was Robert Todd Lincoln. This is Robert Todd Lincoln on the left as he looked the year that his father was assassinated, and that's him on the right, very close to the time of his death.
So he lived quite some time.
Right. They were to go to Manchester Center, Vermont in the spring of 1865, but obviously that did not happen. He was assassinated. But this is the home of Robert Todd Lincoln, called Hildene, and it's in Manchester Center, Vermont. It is a museum.
It's a famous, yes.
Beautiful museum of some note. That is the Equinox Hotel at the turn of the century, and that is also in Manchester Center, Vermont. Now that was interesting because Mary Todd Lincoln had visited there with the boys earlier on, and that's why she wanted to come back after things had died down in the Civil War. Well, obviously that did not happen. I had the pleasure and distinction in the early 1990s of being a part of the restoration of the Equinox, which was slated for the wrecking ball because of a fire. This is the Mary Todd Lincoln Suite as it looked at the time that she stayed there. And we had 3 months to restore the burned out parts of the hotel, so it was a fabulous
So it
project.
has all been restored now?
Yes, it has, and it's lovely. This is one of the jobs I worked on there was the Radius dining room there at the Equinox. Gorgeous, gorgeous facility. It's a total of 17 buildings built in 16 different architectural styles.
Really?
So it was really quite a challenge. That's the Marsh Tavern at the Equinox. And good old Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys, that's where they hatched their schemes. And their schemes were to defeat the British, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
There he is, old Ethan Allen, sketched there at the door of Fort Ticonderoga, ordering the British to come out, and he wasn't subtle. This is the outside of the Equinox today, as it looks today. It's a lovely place to visit. Just walk through, you can have lunch there. Beautiful part of history. We're back to the Civil War. This is the Gettysburg cemetery as it looked, sketched or looked on the day that Gettysburg address was given by Lincoln. Mary Todd Lincoln had a lot of serious mental issues. She probably would be described as what we know now as bipolar. She had periods of exhilaration and then extreme depression. She caused no end of problems when Lincoln was president. She would interfere with his cabinet meetings and whatever.
She was treated quite well, I think, in the movie Lincoln, don't
Yes,
you
she
think?
was,
I thought they
absolutely.
showed a lot of respect for her
Right.
at that point, because they could have gone a different direction.
Lincoln himself, you can see the aging in the two pictures, the one I showed earlier and this one. During his White House years, he suffered from what was then described as melancholia, but it really was extreme depression.
Well,
and no wonder.
No wonder.
No wonder. First of all, his wife
was dealing with that.
Was dealing with it. He
And
had
his
lost
sons?
2 sons in the White House, had died. He was trying to deal with the Civil War. His wife's family were Confederates, so there were a lot of complications involved there. Lincoln knew. He knew that he could be assassinated. He knew it was possible. He knew that
But he was reckless, though.
Well, he was committed. I don't know if it was reckless. I think he almost knew that he might not make it all the way through, but he had a mission.
Yeah.
And he was
'Cause
committed.
didn't, I mean, he had a bodyguard, but that kind of
Yeah,
didn't, yeah.
there he's visiting troops. And then we have another one, the next one. There he is with General McClellan on the right, and on the left is the newly hired Pinkerton, George Pinkerton, who started the Pinkerton Detective Agency, and that's him there. George, well, he was pretty avant-garde. He hired the first woman detective ever in America, and her name was Kate Warren, and Kate was responsible for helping Pinkerton to avoid an assassination attempt in Baltimore when Lincoln was on his way to his inauguration. So she played quite a large role. I guess she was quite the lady. Well, there he is in the theater, Ford's Theater. That's just a sketch of the dirty deed doer behind him.
Yeah.
The deed was done. He was done in by, obviously, John Wilkes Booth. The interesting part of this whole thing is something I recently found out, and that is, it's now suspected, and Bill O'Reilly touched on it in his book. There was a secret organization at the time called the KGC, and it was
As opposed to the KGB.
exactly, and that was the Knights of the Golden Circle, and it was huge, and it was comprised of Confederates and Confederate sympathizers
Okay.
who, from the beginning of the Civil War,
Had it in for him.
stashed away millions of dollars in gold in different locations, apparently all over the United States. And the plot was that when and if they won the war, they were going to take over, and the gold was to help finance it. And they were going to ship all the slaves to Mexico and have slave state there. And it was a pretty wild possibility, but there's no doubt that the organization did exist. And among the members of that organization, coincidentally, was John Wilkes Booth, Sam Houston, Jesse James.
Well, Houston.
I mean, the list is amazing.
Well, you had to be a Southerner, I guess, to understand
that.
that.
Yeah, you really did.
We're almost out of time, Catherine.
Well, I know. The deed was done. This is Lincoln's funeral train going through Schenectady, New York, believe it or not.
I did not know it came through.
Yeah, and that's a bottle that someone has made of that. And in the next one, you'll see this is this is the Harper's Weekly. This is a view of New York City, the funeral in New York City Hall. Over 10,000 books have been written regarding Lincoln in one respect or another, so he's a fascinating character. This was the New York National Guard in New York City at the time of his funeral there. This is an old stereoscope. You remember the viewer that we all looked at?
Yep,
and that's of the funeral as well. There were many, many tributes and concerts and everything regarding him. There was sheet music. This is his gravestone in Springfield, Illinois. And there he is eulogized. And I think the thing I'd like to leave everyone with today is everyone's family is important. We are all the descendants of immigrants in one way or another.
Do some genealogy.
Absolutely. And part of that has to be verbal. And now that we have technology such as cameras and videos, if you have elderly members of your family, it's extremely important that you document these things while you still can. You may have an ex-murderer there, who knows?
For every good person, you probably got one that's off
or
the
a
other.
horse thief or something like that.